Hey everybody, welcome into the Alabama Recruiting Show. I'm Hannah Chalker alongside SEC Country's Crimson Tide recruiting reporter, Chris Kirshner. Thanks for joining us today. Alabama becomes the fourth team, the only team, to get into the college football playoff all 4 years. It's incredible. Number 4, I wasn't shocked. Chris, what was your reaction to it all?
I actually was kind of surprised.
Really?
I did think the committee was going to put Ohio State in, just because there are already 2 Southern teams outside of Alabama that are in it. So I figured that, maybe they would get, another part of the country in there, throw Ohio State in the mix. It's not like, ESPN is going to lose ratings because Ohio State is also one of the most watched teams across the country. So after Ohio State beat Wisconsin, there was still some doubt in my mind. But just because it was a close game over Wisconsin, they only won by 6 points, it definitely made Alabama's case to get in the playoff much better.
Well, Nick Saban was telling ESPN's Reese Davis that he didn't even find out through the announcement, the official announcement on TV. He was hosting recruits at the time, and someone had to come in and tell him in his office. And rumor has it that it was Brenton Cox that was the recruit in his office at the time. You're the one who broke that. Is that true?
Yeah, Brenton Cox, 5-star Ohio State defensive end, was in Tuscaloosa this past weekend for an official visit, one of Alabama's top overall targets. I was told that out of all the official visitors this past weekend, there were 4 of them. Nick Saban spent the most time with Cox. Alabama needs defensive linemen, linebackers. He's one of those hybrid guys who could play both. Alabama's recruiting him as a jack linebacker. So I was told that Brenton Cox was that visitor with Nick Saban. Saban said on ESPN he was in his car. And in my opinion, if you're a recruit with Nick Saban as the football rankings come out and Alabama gets the spot and Ohio State doesn't, and you're committed to Ohio State, in my opinion, it's hard to not commit to Alabama at that point just because you're sitting with Nick Saban. He gets the news at the same time as you. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Cox.
Yeah, and you get to react to him. So we've got a lot more about Brenton Cox coming up, so stick around for that. But let's continue to talk a little bit more about Alabama and the college football playoffs. What does that do for some of the recruits that are on the fence?
Yeah, it definitely helps Alabama. As we've said before, recruits want to play for winners, and Alabama now has a 1 in 4 chance to be one of those teams to win it all. So it definitely helps Alabama recruiting efforts. Alabama still only has 11 commitments. Again, I really wouldn't be too worried about that number as of now, just because there are still lots of targets out there for Alabama. So getting into the playoff and potentially winning another national championship is only going to help Alabama in the coming weeks as we get closer to the early signing period, and then in February for the original signing period.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. We want to get you involved in the conversation as well. We're going to do that a little bit later in the show, but we've got a lot of people in here today. Leslie Smith is here. She says, roll Tide. We have a question about who are the other high-profile recruits that were there with Britton Cox. Ask Lee Foster.
Yeah, 3 other people that were in Tuscaloosa this weekend on official visits. 4-star Alabama jack linebacker commit Jordan Davis was one. 4-star wide receiver Justin Watkins, and 4-star safety Trey Dean, who is committed to Tennessee, who we'll touch on in a few minutes. But those were the only official visitors this weekend. Alabama will have more this upcoming weekend and the following weekend, which will be the final weekend before the early signing period.
Let's talk about another high-profile recruit in quarterback Emory Jones. Now, I'm not sure if you guys followed the composite, but there was a change today on the composite. Emory Jones is now a 4-star QB instead of a 5-star, but he moved up to the number 2 dual-threat QB in the country. So there's just some changes there. You can go to Rivals.com, 247sports.com, wherever you get your recruiting news. If you check out the composite, he is now a 4-star recruit. You were actually able to go to his high school game on Friday. You talked to him in Franklin, Georgia. What did he say?
Yeah, well, first off, I do want to touch on something that Emory did that just impressed me on a personal level. Emory Jones's high school team, Heard County, lost in the final 5 seconds of the game. And in my this is something I do personally. I just usually don't talk to recruits, especially after losing such an emotional game like Heard County did. They lost in the final 5 seconds of the game to Hapeville Charter to potentially get a spot in the state championship. Jones was very emotional, crying alongside with his teammates. But Jones, I've talked to Jones one-on-one several times before. He knows me. He knows I cover Alabama recruiting. About 30 minutes after the game, he saw me on the field. Shook my hand and said, "Hey, you want to, you want to talk?" And I definitely appreciated his time for doing that. I wasn't planning on interviewing him, especially after a game like that where his team lost in a heartbreaking fashion. So I was definitely impressed with Jones. That says a lot about his character. As far as his recruitment goes, I did ask him about that. He still says that he's committed to Ohio State, and that's where he's going. He made some interesting comments. He told me that Ohio State had reached out to him and told him that they were going to start offering other quarterbacks. Ohio State has offered other quarterbacks right now. So that's definitely putting some pressure on Jones, just because Ohio State could choose to take 2 quarterbacks in this class, or take one and make Jones's decision for him and say, hey, we're going to have to move on. There is one quarterback out there that Alabama fans definitely need to keep an eye on, and that's Matthew Baldwin. He decommitted from Colorado State, I believe, last week, and he is rumored to be committing to Ohio State in the near future. Now, if that happens, I personally think Emory Jones will take a step back from his Ohio State commitment, but that's just my opinion. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Jones. He is an early enrollee. He told me that he's planning on having a ceremony at his school on December 19th. That's Heard County's final day of school, and at that time, he's planning on making his final decision and then signing during one of those 3 early signing day periods. So we'll see what happens, but his recruitment is going to be wrapped up here in a few weeks.
Just to sum all that up, so Emory Jones told you, quote, that he's going with Ohio State as of right now. Right. This was on Friday, so didn't get a chance to talk to him after the college football playoff rankings were out. But do you really think he's going to stick with the Buckeyes?
I really don't. Recruits, they're definitely emotional. A lot of the times in interviews, they say what they believe that the schools recruiting them want to hear. And he's been committed to Ohio State now for 2 years. It's his dream school. But, from talking to people close to Alabama and Auburn, the 2 schools that he told me that he's still considering at this time, both schools feel like Jones is not going to Ohio State, regardless of whatever he says in interviews. And like you said, he said he's going to Ohio State, quote, as of right now. Okay. That could definitely change today, tomorrow, Wednesday, who knows. It's recruiting. Recruiting changes pretty much every single day. But from what I've been told, I do expect Emory Jones to be Alabama's 2018 quarterback when it's all said and done, even though he said he's locked in with Ohio State. The fact that Ohio State has already started offering other quarterbacks, and Ohio State is likely going to get a quarterback committed here in about a week or 2 in Matthew Baldwin, who I just mentioned. That says a lot. I don't think Ohio State believes that Jones is going to end up with the Buckeyes in the end, and I do believe that Alabama will end up getting the nation's number 2 dual-threat quarterback prospect in the class of 2018.
Well, sticking with the topic of Ohio State commits that Nick Saban wants to flip, 5-star defensive end Britton Cox, also Ohio State commit, was in Tuscaloosa this past weekend, and we touched on him at the top of the show, but tell me more in depth what Brenton Cox is thinking right now, and how was his visit with Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa? Yeah,
it's definitely a good visit. I actually briefly chatted with Brenton Cox's high school coach at Stockbridge. I was actually planning on going to Stockbridge High School today to speak to Brenton Cox, but his high school coach said Brenton is done with interviews. He will not be doing any interviews until he chooses and enrolls at the school of his choice. He is an early enrollee, so like Emory Jones, his recruitment will be wrapped up here in a few weeks. As far as his official visit, I was told that Brenton had a really, really good time, spent a lot of time with current linebacker Mack Wilson. If you guys don't know, Mack Wilson definitely has one of the most effervescent personalities out there. Definitely a guy that recruits gravitate towards. So the fact that Max spent a little time with Brenton definitely helps there. But also an interesting note about Brenton Cox is that one of the people he brought along to Tuscaloosa was one of his coaches. And one of his coaches is a very, 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 very big Alabama fan, and he's definitely been in his ear about potentially flipping from Ohio State to Alabama. So we'll see what happens. As of right now, it's too early to say whether I think Alabama is going to flip him. He does have an official visit to Ohio State this weekend, and then the following weekend he's planning on taking an official visit to Georgia. As of right now, from what I've been hearing, like Emory Jones, I don't believe Brenton Cox is going to end up signing with the Buckeyes, just from what I've been hearing. I think it's going to be in between Alabama and Georgia. If he ends up taking that visit to Georgia, which will be the final weekend before the early signing period, who knows? But Georgia's definitely a hot team on the recruiting trail. Obviously one of the 4 playoff teams, so that definitely helps them out. With Cox, he's very close to a lot of Georgia Bulldogs, both currently on the team and commitment-wise. So that definitely gives Georgia a little leg up on Alabama. But from what I've been hearing on Cox's visit this past weekend, is it really couldn't have gone any better for Alabama, and we'll see what happens moving forward.
Let's talk about one more recruit specifically, and then we'll move on to other topics. But that's Trey Dean, the 4-star safety Tennessee commit. He's actually cousins with Amari Cooper, so that could help his case. You know, he was in Tuscaloosa this past weekend too. What's the status on him?
Yeah, I mean, prior to this official visit, I didn't know if Trey Dean had a committable offer from Alabama, just because there are, several defensive backs on the board still. But I did confirm with a source close to the program that Trey Dean can flip from Tennessee to Alabama if he wants to. And like you said, he is cousins with Amari Cooper. Obviously an Alabama legend, currently with the Oakland Raiders. Second cousins with Amari. I spoke to Trey Dean over the summer, and he told me that he speaks to Amari somewhat, but he's not too close with him. But from what I've heard on Trey Dean's visit, like Brenton Cox, it went very, very well. Alabama made it clear to him that he does have a committable offer, and he could commit to the Crimson Tide whenever he wants. And just with the mess that Tennessee is right now, obviously the Vols don't have a coach still, switched athletic directors, so who knows what's going to happen with Trey Dean. From what I've been told, Trey is waiting to see what happens with Tennessee's head coaching vacancy. He's been committed there for quite some time now. He wants to give Tennessee a chance to hire a coach. But outside of that, Dean is still planning on taking visits. I believe he's visiting Florida this weekend. He just got offered by Nebraska, new coach Scott Frost. I think he's planning on taking a visit there. But as of right now, Trey Dean is definitely one of Alabama's top defensive back targets. He's one of those guys that Nick Saban evaluated throughout the fall, and Saban saw enough of Dean's game to say, hey, we should give Dean a chance to have a committable offer, and now he does. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, especially how the Tennessee coaching vacancy shapes out. But if that goes in favor of Alabama's way, and Dean doesn't have a relationship with the guy Tennessee brings in, who knows? Maybe he'll end up flipping to Alabama.
So all three of the guys that we've talked about so far, Britton Cox, Emory Jones, Trey Dean, they're all Georgia guys. So let's hop on over to Texas and let's talk about some of the Texas recruits for Alabama and the switch between Kevin Sumlin, Jimbo Fisher in Aggie land there. So with Jimbo Fisher, I'm sure you saw the video. He comes off the plane, yes. The red carpet is rolled out, the band is there to welcome Jimbo Fisher. The Aggies got their #1 guy. That's the guy they wanted. They didn't have to go down the list like Tennessee. So how does that affect recruiting, and who are some of the top guys from Texas that Nick Saban is after?
Yeah, I think there are two guys in particular that Jimbo Fisher directly impacts Alabama's recruiting efforts, and that's 4-star defensive tackle Bobby Brown. We've talked about him several times on the show before, and 4-star wide receiver target Jalen Waddle. In particular with Jalen Waddle, he's been Alabama's top slot wide receiver target since the summer. It seems like Alabama has been the favorite throughout. Jimbo Fisher gets hired at Texas A&M, and a lot of recruiting reporters start changing their crystal ball on 247sports.com to Texas A&M for Jalen Waddle. Now, I reached out to someone close to the Alabama program, asked him what Jimbo Fisher going to Texas A&M meant for Alabama's chances to get Jalen Waddle. And he told me straight up that he definitely believes that Waddle could end up committing to the Aggies whenever he decides to commit. And it's definitely going to be a blow to Alabama in the 2018 class because, like I said, he is the top slot wide receiver target and has been since the summer. But from Alabama's side of things, I can say that Alabama still feels confident on Jalen Waddle ending up in Crimson. But obviously there's going to be some work there, and if he does visit Texas A&M here in the next few weeks, who knows what happens. Waddle was considering Florida State when Jimbo was at Florida State, so he does have a relationship there with Coach Fisher. It's not going to be something that Waddle and Fisher need to start building up a brand new relationship. They have a relationship already. Waddle is from the state of Texas, and a lot of times kids want to stay close to home, so we'll see what happens. Now, as far as Bobby Brown, Alabama had an in-home visit with Brown. Nick Saban and Tosh Lupoy were in Brown's home last week. The in-home visit went very, very well with Brown and his mother. His mother made some comments to 247 Sports, just raving about that visit. But I personally don't think a flip is likely unless Terry Price, Texas A&M's current defensive line coach, isn't retained by Jimbo Fisher. And I don't think that's likely. I think Price will be retained by Fisher. And at that point, I don't think Bobby Brown to Alabama is a likely option.
Chris Kirshner, I'm Hannah Chalker. We've got some really great comments rolling in here on the Facebook Live, so go ahead and keep those coming. I have one more question for Chris before we get to those. We've got some really great questions so far. So you mentioned that it's too early to tell on some of these guys, but really is it? Because the early signing period is just, 2 weeks away now, December 20th through 22nd. So how does that affect some of these guys' decisions and who signs early for Alabama?
Alabama has 11 commitments, as I said. 4 of them are planning to sign early. Slade Bolden, Jordan Davis, Stephon Wynn, and Skylar DeLong. Those 4 are the only 4 that are currently slated to sign early and enroll early. There are several others who are planning on signing during the early signing period, but won't enroll until the summer. As far as targets go, there are several guys who are planning on signing early. 4-star tackle Penei Sewell comes to mind. Dominic Wood-Anderson, a junior college tight end, Alabama's top tight end target. He's planning on signing early. So there are several guys out there for Alabama who are planning on signing early. And again, like you said, it's just in 2 weeks. It's getting close. Alabama has definitely hit the road recruiting. They had a bye week last week, essentially, and Alabama used the entire week to recruit and get on the road and have a leg up over Auburn and Georgia, who are playing for the SEC championship. So it's going to happen throughout these next 2 weeks. Alabama will be on the road constantly in recruits' homes, going to state finals games this upcoming weekend. So it's going to be an interesting 2 weeks. Alabama should gain some commitments and signees here in the next 2 weeks. And we'll start to see Alabama start climbing those rankings.
So along those same lines, Kevin Henley wants to know, who do you think will be the next to commit?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say just because right now Alabama doesn't have, Alabama's targets don't have a set commitment date, just the ones that are planning on signing early. So we've already talked about Emory Jones, Brenton Cox, Dominic Wood-Anderson, Penei Sewell. Those guys are planning on signing early. As of now, I expect Jones to be in Alabama's class. Penei Sewell, the 4-star offensive tackle. Tosh Lupoy is actually in the state of Utah today, visiting Sewell. Alabama had an in-home visit with him last week, and they're having one again today. So those are some guys who could commit early. Nadab Joseph is still out there, 4-star cornerback. He was supposed to commit a couple weeks ago. He still hasn't made his decision. He could commit in any day now. So those are some guys that I would definitely keep an eye on.
Is your dad's name Glenn?
He is.
Glenn! Hey, Chris's dad. He says you're doing a great job. Love Dad. Thanks for watching, Glenn. That's awesome. Okay, moving right along in the comment section, Ronald Sloan says, any interest in Ole Miss players that are looking to transfer?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that Alabama is going to keep an eye on. As of now, I haven't heard anybody that Alabama is currently evaluating. And right now, Ole Miss's seniors are the ones who can freely transfer. I know Shea Patterson, he reached out to Ole Miss and said he'd like to explore options. So Ole Miss can choose to accept or deny those requests. But right now, I haven't heard anybody in particular that's currently at Ole Miss who's looking to transfer to Alabama.
Felicia Moss says Roll Tide from Montgomery. Thanks for watching, Felicia. Aaron Cole, any lock-in commitments that are for sure?
Yeah, I mean, there are several. I think the majority of Alabama's commitments are already locked in. There are only two who I can see flipping to other schools, and that's 4-star linebacker Quay Walker and 3-star linebacker Vernon Jackson. Those two guys are actively looking at other schools. Vernon Jackson, he's still considering Texas, TCU, and Texas A&M. And for Walker, he's still considering Auburn. One of his best friends, Marcavius Bryant, was a freshman linebacker, is a freshman linebacker for the Tigers. So those are the only two guys who I can see potentially flipping their commitments from Alabama to another school.
Matt Malone says, I know I've asked about him before, but do you think Justin Ross has a change of heart after seeing Seth Williams commit to Auburn?
Yeah, I don't think Seth Williams' decision to commit to Auburn has any impact on Justin Ross. I know Auburn really wants Justin Ross still. Seth Williams and Justin Ross, similar body types, both, I believe, 6'4", so big-bodied receivers that both Auburn and Alabama wanted. Seth Williams, who's from the Tuscaloosa area, actually grew up a big-time Alabama fan, attends Paul W. Bryant High School, so he actually decided to commit to Auburn on Thanksgiving Day. But I don't think Williams' decision to commit to Auburn affects Justin Ross in any way. He's still strongly considering Auburn, Alabama, and Clemson. He's still planning on taking his recruitment all the way until February's National Signing Day. So there's still time. As I've said previously, I still think Clemson is the favorite to land Justin Ross, but he is the state of Alabama's #1 overall prospect, and a lot of the times that recruit decides on Alabama or Auburn. So I wouldn't count Alabama or Auburn out of the race for Justin Ross at this time.
All right, we're going to take one more comment, and really it's two questions by David Clark. He says, are there any 5-star players that are going to commit this year, and why so few commitments at this time?
To answer your first question, Brenton Cox, he's a 5-star. We've been talking about him. He definitely has a chance to flip from Ohio State to Alabama. He's a 5-star prospect. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the updated 247 Sports composite, but Iyabi Anoma, he's definitely in the 5-star conversation. Defensive end from Maryland, down to Alabama, Maryland, and Michigan. I expect Alabama to land his commitment. He's planning on taking his recruitment all the way until National Signing Day as of now. So those are two guys who are 5-star prospects who Alabama definitely has a really good chance with. 5-star cornerback Tyson Campbell is also out there. Patrick Surtain, while he's a long shot, I think he's going to LSU, but Alabama is still in the race for him. So there are several 5-star prospects out there. I just haven't looked at the updated composite to see if any other Alabama targets got a 5-star bump. But those are definitely guys who definitely have a chance to end up in Alabama's class. As far as your second question, why does Alabama have so few commitments? Just this year, Alabama's top targets are just waiting to make their decisions with an early signing period. A lot of these guys are waiting to make their decisions at that point, and a lot of them are just waiting until February to make their decisions final. It's not that Alabama is just missing on guys left and right. Yes, Alabama has missed on several targets this year, several targets that they really wanted to get, but it's not like Alabama at every position is just striking out on its top targets. Like I said, a lot of them are just waiting it out to either commit during the early signing period or in February. So again, there's really nothing to be concerned about. Alabama will have one of the top recruiting classes once again.
You blew right through that name. Say that 5 times fast.
Which name?
The name that you just said. I don't know.
Iavianoma.
Yeah, that one. How many times have you said that?
Quite a bit. I mean, it's like Tua Tagovailoa. You just got to know these names.
Oh, and I'm just trying to get caught up. All right, where can everybody find your recruiting news?
SECcountry.com. Make sure you guys choose Alabama as your team. Click recruiting, and all of our recruiting information will be right there.
All right, and you can catch us right here on the Alabama Recruiting Show on SEC Country Live every week. Thanks, guys. Chris Kirshner. I'm Hannah Chalker. You can follow us on social media, and we'll see you next time.